No, and in the same case, your first instinct, as you said, is about yourself. And I see, it's interesting as I look down. A lot of us have tears in our eyes. I think that everybody who lived through that remembers it so well, and I'm sure it also evokes past things. The memories you bounce off that one. And I remember I was in college, and it was much the same way. I was at the University of Texas, and that night President Kennedy was coming to Austin, and I had gotten a few very precious tickets. It was just so exciting, so that some of my friends could go and hear him. And my roommate called me, and everybody will say they had some sort of remembrance, but I remember saying, worrying about knowing that this was the time they were in Dallas, and I hoped everything was going all right, and I was really worried. And I went upstairs, and I just got into my room, and my former roommate called me, and she said, "Stay where you are, I'm coming to see you." And she came over. She had heard it on the radio, because I wouldn't have probably heard it on the radio. I didn't listen in the middle of the day. She came over, and she stayed with me, and I had that same similar thing. I was in a dorm with 300 or 400 girls, and having this man come up that back road. And my next instinct was, when I couldn't do anything, was you wanted to do something active. I mean, you could pray, but you wanted to try to see if there was anything else you could do to reach out. And my next thought was about the Conley children, because I had grown up with the Conley children. And he'd been Uncle Johnny, and we didn't know if he was going to live. And so I asked if they would take me to the governor's mansion, because I knew that I would have the Secret Service with me, and that maybe we could all protect each other. And so I went and stayed there until we could hear a little bit more word about my father, whether he was all right, because I didn't know at that time either. There was a report that he had, one, been shot, two, he'd had a heart attack. That was another report. And so you have all that. And I also sympathize on another subject with Susan on talking about hearing these terrible things. I had heard reports about my husband being killed in Vietnam and those kind of things. And, those are very scary until you can find out what the truth is. Sometimes rumors run very fast, and you hope that the principal doesn't hear them, that you can find out that they're not right. But that does happen. And those, I think we've probably talked about some of the greatest crises, but what about Mrs. Ford when, the great trauma of moving in the White House the way you did? What
that
were
was
your
a
thoughts?
crisis, too.
Oh, I know. That's why I want you to talk about it.
Well, for me personally, and I think for our whole family, for many reasons, we just hoped that the whole thing would never happen. We knew it was a possibility. The way everything was evolving out of the crisis that was going on in the administration and the government. But I have to admit that I prayed a great deal over that, and I prayed that somehow everything would work out, and it all would be forgiven, and it was all wrong, and all these things, and a great deal of that was done not only because of my support of my party and my feeling about the president, but also my feeling that I did not want my husband to become president, just as you thought of your father and his going into the presidency.
And not that way. Not that way.
No. Well, I don't know why. It's just that it was a very, very difficult time for our kids and for us, and there wasn't much we could do about it. We had no control over it, and not to have control over a situation is a very uncomfortable position. We entertained in the White House before we ever moved in, because the transition was so abrupt with the Nixons, of course, after the resigning of the president, making his statement on that morning before my husband was sworn in as president, and we walked to the plane with him, the helicopter, as it lifted off the south lawn. And I know, for me, that was the saddest day of my life, because it was just such a complete turnaround, one that I didn't want to make, but it was out of no choice. To assume the delegation of all of the demands of the role of assuming those as First Lady in an overnight situation is rather strange, no matter how much you know about it. And so taking over was traumatic, yes, it was traumatic. And we had a dinner party scheduled the day I was sworn in. I'll never forget, they called up and they said, "Mrs. Ford, what are you planning to do about the state dinner for King Hussein?" And I said, "Oh, well, when is that?" And they said, "That's next week." And I couldn't believe it, but we had to do all the plans. I mean, we had to make the list, send out the telegrams. It was like the ending of one and the beginning of a new. And maybe that was good, because it was so abrupt that it shocked you into action. We moved in, I guess, 9 days later, and from then on it was a little bit easier. But before we close this morning, and I know we're getting close to the closing time, I want to thank you all, but I want to ask one question, and I'm going to start right down the line, and that would be, we know that campaigning is the most marvelous training for going into the White House, but certainly we all have a piece of advice for whoever is going to be the next family. And if you can just quickly give us a thumbnail idea, Luci, of what your piece of advice would be.
Make the most out of every moment. Use every moment you have to its fullest to learn as much as you possibly can. Recognize that some of the sacrifices and some of the personal things you might like to do today, you can't do, but you can do them down the road, because it's a unique opportunity to be an eyewitness to history, to learn, and to maybe give back to a country that's given an awful lot to all of us. Savor it, because nothing like that will ever pass your way again.
Thank you. Susan.
I mean, that's basically a ditto. I just can't imagine. It's like a fairy tale that you enter into, and then it says the end, but there's never an end to it. Your fairy tale continues. It's just go for it and enjoy it.
When I was in the White House, Lady Bird said to me on so many occasions, "Enjoy, enjoy," and which is what you have said, I think, Luci. And I think that is good advice, to enjoy your time there. I think that if I were advising someone, I would also say be very confident about what you want to do and about what you're doing, and decide that the things that you're going to do are good and best for the country, and then don't worry about what anybody says about them. If you can accept that and do that, you'll have an enjoyable time in the White House.
Then you can enjoy it.
That's right. Then you can enjoy it.
Oh, I agree with everything that's been said. And I think that the next conference needs to be on what to do after you leave.
Ellen?
I don't suppose this is really advice. This is just something that I would hope might happen in the future. It happened to a great extent under both Mrs. Carter and Mrs. Ford, but I would like, it's not advice, but I would like to see, and if anyone was interested, a future First Lady, it might be advice. I would like to see more insight given by the person herself as to exactly what she was thinking, not just doing. And I was thinking back to my grandmother. She used the device of her column, My Day, and other things, in which she would, a lot of it was trivia, but a lot of it also she talked about the books she'd read. And she said, you know, I don't have to agree with all of this, and neither do you, but this is an interesting viewpoint. And she talked about the articles that she had read. And I was just getting a little more personal insight into what the thinking is in the White House. It struck me particularly, since we had talked about assassinations at the time of the Reagan assassination attempt. And I would have expected to, I really did expect that Mrs. Reagan or somebody in the family might have said, well, I recommend that, I don't recommend, but I have read and I am thinking about possibly some way to control, say, Saturday night specials. Or not a word after this terrible, traumatic thing.